cuss on your records?
Yeah.
Do you defile women with your lyrics?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you fondle your genitalia on stage?
Yeah. Whenever possible.
Do you guys respect anything at all?
Not a goddamn thing.
Radio Free Innsmouth, episode 381, talking about some four-letter genre type stuff. You know what I mean? That internet thing where people like to take four words, abbreviate them down to the first letter of each, slap them together, boom, it's a genre of music now. Usually when people do that with black metal, it's for more ideological reasons, you know, like NSBM. Generally, just kind of sounds like black metal, except you flip the 666 upside down and you get some type action. Or everybody's favorite genre, DSBM, very well named because whenever I have to listen to one of these bands, it makes me want to myself. With death metal, it's usually less ideological and more geographical, with the most notable example being NYDM.
NEDM.
No, NYDM, New York Death Metal. It all kind of stems from the New York Death Militia, formed by Will Romer from Mortician, generally applies to brutal death metal from New York. You know the kind of stuff I'm talking about. Suffocation, pyrexia, internal bleeding, afterbirth. It's based on geography, but it's become enough of its own style to where you can say even a band that isn't from New York sounds like a New York death metal band. We're going to be talking about a closely stylistically adjacent sort of four-letter death metal this week. That being TXDM, Texas Death Metal.
Holy dog shit, Texas!
Which, like NYDM, kind of refers to brutal death metal, but in this case it's from Texas. So you might have a band like Divine Eve / Crimson Relic. Definitely death metal, definitely from Texas. Not necessarily considered TXDM. Imprecation, kind of a borderline case, where it definitely influenced a lot of people throwing up the TXDM symbology, but they themselves aren't necessarily just like Texas brutal death metal. No, the big TXDM band is Devourment, who I'm not actually going to be covering this week. Now hold your horses there, partner. I don't have a problem with Devourment. I remember way back when I was first getting into death metal, they were sort of a whipping boy band for the tech death obsessed scene at the time, talking around like Butcher the Week era. Whole lot of people complaining about that album. And they got that Mike Majewski guy who draws a lot of what I would consider undeserved ire from personages of the Persuasion. Doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. Seems like a cool enough dude. You know, he wears scattered remnant shirts. He does some cool artwork. He duckbills his hat. That ain't even a flat brim. That's a parabola. So unless I'm missing something, I don't know why this guy's considered to be some kind of arch poser. But Devourment's fine. I like their demo and their first album.
I like them. I don't love them.
But there are other so-called TXDM bands that I like a whole lot more that get a whole lot less attention. And I wanted to talk about three of those this week. First up, we have a band that features guitarist Kevin Clark from my personal favorite era of Devourment, that being the demo and the first album, who I enjoy substantially more than Devourment, and honestly, substantially more than a lot of death metal. Like, I've only been listening to this album for 6 months now, and it's become one of my all-time favorites of the style. Talking about Sintury. And as you would expect for a band connected to Devourment, they do sound kind of Devourment-ish. They got a little bit of that type stuff going on that Devourment's so famous for, but they don't really have any of that kind of chicanery that you hear all the time in Devourment going on. Instead, they fill the gaps in between the more groove-oriented parts with, well, we'll get to what they filled in with, but suffice it to say it aligns with my personal taste in death metal a whole lot more. These guys only did one album. Couldn't even find any demos. 1998, Corpse Gristle Records, Disgorging the Dead. If you ain't heard this album and you're into death metal, it's gonna blow your mind to hear something like this, especially from 1998, dude. I mean, just listen to how this album starts. Alright, that is a remarkably modern-sounding breakdown for the era. And then they do a very modern-sounding slow-down version of that same infectious, groove-oriented riff. I went out of my way to snag a copy of this album off of Discogs as soon as I got this far into the song. Like, where has this album been all my life? And then this transition here.
Hold it. I know what you're thinking.
Okay, they went back into the faster version of that groove riff, then they did a little bit of a drum roll. That means they're gonna jump into a fast blasty part, right?
Hell no, to the no, no,
No, they just go right into another crushing groove riff. This is an album that really gives you what you want, even when it does speed up. They sort of cut up the fast riff with these sort of semi-ambient floaty sections. Then they take that fast part of the riff, make it recursive, kind of looping in on itself to serve as another launch pad for some more devastating groove-inflected sections. Like this right here, this is a thuggish fucking riff. Check out this harmonic. And the solos on this album are also fucking sick as hell. They remind me of that kind of almost neoclassical melodicism you would hear from the leads in the John Levasseur, Lord Worm era of Cryptopsy. But they're over the top of these fucking sledgehammer-ass riffs. There have been many occasions over the years where people have tried to get me to listen to the Devourment records that I'm not as into, or maybe a band like Dying Fetus. And the music that they're describing that they think I'll like doesn't really end up sounding like those records. What it does end up sounding like is Sintury. Like I said, this is an album that gives you what you fucking want, or at least it gives me what I want. There's no sweep picking, there's no gravity blast, there's no boring parts, there's no bullshit. There's just quality fucking brutal death metal. And it's one of the heaviest albums ever. Some people might complain it's not that fast. Like what you're hearing right now is about as fast as it gets. But guess what? Unless it's a super dense, depleted uranium rod being launched down a series of magnetic coils at some poor goat fucker by golem agents of the
Brazilian
occupied government, heavy stuff doesn't tend to move that fast. Here's another really cool sort of atmospheric kind of slam, utilizing a whole lot of weird guitar noise, some cool rolling drum beats. I like this sort of really hypnotic take on brutal death metal breakdowns. Haven't really heard too much of it outside of bands like Infestor or another of the bands we're going to be talking about this week. Anyways, the suffocation influence in this album is omnipresent, as you're hearing from that cool little bass fill, or from these slightly more technical yet still very brutal, atavistic sort of riffs. Like this whole churning section coming up right here, this is total suffocation style riffage. And if you've been listening to this show for any length of time, you know how I feel about suffocation. Like there you got a Mike Smith style blast, and the whole blasting section is lacerated by those stabs of groove. And then there's a really thuggish sort of groove riff. Almost kind of reminds me of Gutted, who have been one of my favorite death metal bands going back years and years. So this album has a really cool style, hints of a whole lot of other bands I like. I was planning on playing you more samples from it, but honestly, just go out and get this album, dude. I don't want to spoil any more of it for you. One of the coolest albums I've ever heard in recent memory. Up next, another one album wonder from Corpse Gristle Records. 2 years after that Century release, we got Infernal Dominion with Salvation Through Infinite Suffering.
Suffering succotash!
This one's a Wes Weaver band. I've covered 2 of those so far. Blaspherian on episode 287 and Imprecation on episode 373. Infernal Dominion is the band he was doing music with in between Imprecation and Infernal Dominion. And it's pretty much a TXDM brutal death metal take on kind of both of those band styles. It's really interesting stuff. Definitely one of the darkest sounding brutal death metal albums I've ever heard. Almost got a bit of a black metal thing going on at times. Quite comparable to Infestor in that regard. When the album starts out, it's pretty damn similar sounding to Imprecation, even got that same guitar sound. But then these chugs come in, and it very much takes a turn towards brutal death metal TXDM. But it manages to distinguish itself from other bands operating in that artistic space by utilizing a very perverse sense of melody, quite redolent of Incantation or again Imprecation, Wes's previous band. Depending on how you look at it, this is either a brutal death metal album kind of wrapped up in black metal-y clothing, or else it's a secret Black Death kind of record gussied up with brutal death metal aesthetics. Whatever you want to call it, it's fucking sick. To my ears, it does lean closer to brutal death metal. Like this really chunky call and response section between growls and screams sounds very brutal death to me. Yet again, giving off a very Infestor-esque vibe in that regard, which is always a positive for me because I fucking love Through the Depths and Degradation. But then, like this blasty part right here sounds a whole lot like Imprecation, as does the slower part coming up after it. Luckily, it sounds like my personal favorite era of Imprecation, that being the Theurgia Goetia Summa compilation. Again, it's even got the same fucking guitar sound, which is a great guitar sound. one of the best in death metal.
야 날씨 나를 완전 제대로 잡았다.
Oh no, believe me, I understand where you're coming from. At first glance, this honestly just seems like it could be another Imprecation album. I mean, back in their early days, Imprecation were even rather fond of throwing in those style breakdown riffs, and nothing in that first Infernal Dominion song really seemed that far removed from that sort of thing. But here's the deal. As the album goes on, you start to realize nothing Imprecation ever did reached these same depths of street level ignorant brutal death metal that this album has all over the fucking place. Like, we're almost talking repudiation and torturement levels of that sort of thing at times. And the fact that that sort of thing coexists so seamlessly with the more black metal-y parts of this music is a testament to the compositional strength of these musicians. Like this right here, this is some Legion of Inveracity shit, but you listen to it, you realize it's a variation on that black metal riff from earlier. Speaking of which, here's another cool sort of perversely melodic black metal, death metal kind of atmospheric riff going on. Very much up there with the heights of Incantation and Immolation when it comes to that sort of thing. And they seamlessly jump back into that groove stuff to set us up for a very Glenn Benton approved vocal bit before heading back into that rolling melodic sort of riff that will then take us into a swifter style of groove riff, which brings back again some more of that Glenn Benton-y style goodness. Infernal Dominion, look, I love Imprecation, I love Blaspherian. Depending on what kind of mood I'm in, Infernal Dominion might actually hit the hardest for me out of all the Wes Weaver projects. And I kind of wish we got more out of this incarnation of the Texas death metal sound, but alas, one album wonder. Our final band this week, much like Sintury, had a 1998 debut album, which was also on Corpse Gristle Records. Look, I swear, I didn't even realize all these bands were on the same label. I wasn't really around for death metal when all these albums came out. I had to buy all these years after the fact off of Discogs. In 1998, I was still out here playing Pokemon.
Hey, I know. I'll use my trusty frying pan as a drying pan.
Plus, if I called this episode something like Corpse Gristle Records, I'd get a bunch of bozos out here saying shit like, where's Devourment? Where's Viral Load? Why aren't you talking about the bands that I want you to talk about? So fuck you. This is 3 TXDM bands that aren't Devourment. And the third one is Prophecy. 1998, Foretold, Foreseen. This one might actually be the most standard brutal death metal sounding of the bunch. Sintury was a little bit more slam oriented. Infernal Dominion had all that kind of black metal stuff going on. These guys, brutal death metal, but with a twist, like with that clean guitar intro. Whole lot of atmosphere, a whole lot of long songs with a lot of differentiated sections. They also have the most brutal death metal sounding snare drum as you're hearing right now, that clonky shit. Gotta love that. But I would almost call these guys the Abigor of brutal death metal, specifically Supreme Immortal Art era Abigor, because these long songs are really like cobbled together mini songlit islands connected by very defined transitions. Like right here, this is a whole new section, kind of bouncing off that prior pair of riffs, bringing us into kind of a new sound world based around the new set of riffs that exists for a while before we hit another very sharp, clearly defined transition. This time moving into a very groove-dominant section of the music. This song actually has multiple breakdown sections like this. And it's not like they just go back to the same breakdown over and over. Each time, it's a new set of breakdown riffs in between the faster parts. And it is because of this compositional quirk that the songs on this album tend to be a bit longer than what you might expect from brutal death metal. Prophecy's a very quirky sort of band. Lyrically, particularly on the albums after this one, they're kind of the opposite of Infernal Dominion. They ended up turning into something of a Jesus band. But the real wacky thing that they're very infamous for is a lot of their lyrics are just downright silly. Like there's a song on here, Dig in a Pit. You can't really tell because it's all... But the lyrics are just them shouting out different people in the Texas scene that they enjoy moshing with at shows. So the lyrics can be goofy, but the music is always decidedly serious. And it's also almost always cool as fuck. Like this right here, another very potent atmospheric sort of section. These kind of rolling drums and hypnotic guitar riffs that end up taking us into another great groove-oriented section, featuring an expertly done utilization of some very squeaky harmonics. And then this happens. Shit, son, if you're gonna bottom out the bass like that, I think that this song deserves a Clifton, New Jersey dripping style 808 drop. Luckily, through the magic of modern technology, we can make that happen for them. There we go. Leading us into the stupidest, in a good way, breakdown of the album. Like very much almost a hardcore kind of thing, with a whole lot of chugs on the drum hit. Unfortunately, I've never gotten a chance to see any of the bands I've covered this week live, but I feel like it would be a good time, particularly in the case of Prophecy, if they're busting out riffs like that. But there is a degree of sophistication to this album, if you remember that cleanly done intro. My personal favorite song on the album, which is also entitled Prophecy, uses that sort of stylistic concession as a jumping off point to create one of the most unique sounding brutal death metal songs out there. In the case of this song, the clean guitar section is heavily expanded to where it almost sounds like something you might hear from a band like Overkill. Like this time around, the clean guitars got their own drum accompaniment. There's harmonies going on with the open chords. And then this fucking lead starts up. And this is some like Kirith Ungol Manila Road shit. Heavily emotional, epic heavy metal. Almost kind of power metal, but in a US power metal sort of way, not the Euro flower power shit. And of course the distortion is gonna come in. And when it starts out, it sounds like fairly typical Prophecy style groove riffs, slow and then a little bit faster. But as the song goes on, you realize this is a very different sort of Prophecy song. They bring back that epic, melancholic, melodic kind of feeling, and eventually they revisit themes from that intro. This is one of those songs, you know, Monstrosity, Suffering to the Conquered, Pessimist, Worms of the Earth. It's not Gothenburg, it's not melodic death metal, but it's death metal that is intensely melodic, coming from a band that you wouldn't necessarily expect this sort of thing from. I fucking love songs like this. I feel like it's kind of its own weird genre of death metal that hasn't really been explored outside of those isolated examples I mentioned earlier, as well as a few other bands, and honestly, a whole lot of the Vehemence discography. It's a hell of a way to end the album, and it's a hell of a way to end this episode. So there you go. 3 great TXDM classics for you to go out there and check out. Because honestly, all 3 of these fucking albums deserve way more attention than they get. As far as a combined total goes, I've gotten into all of these albums sort of in sequence over the past couple years. And I was actually kind of mad that when I was getting into death metal way back in the day when these albums were a lot newer, nobody fucking mentioned them. Everybody was trying to get me to listen to whatever fucking boring shit instead of, you know, this stuff. The good shit, man.
That's what's up.
But hey, whatever. It just means that I actually got to hear some death metal that I liked later on in life. So all's well that ends well. Thanks for listening or watching or whatever you did. And I'll see you next time. Get the fuck out of here.
God, I just love that I don't give a damn hip hop attitude. It's so real.